She thought walking into that courtroom would be the end of her dignity. She had no idea it would become the moment everything changed. The fluorescent lights above Courtroom 7B buzzed like angry wasps as Sarah Mitchell pushed through the heavy oak doors, her worn leather purse clutched against her ribs like a shield. Every eye in the gallery turned toward her, some curious, some judgmental, most indifferent. She could feel their stares crawling across her faded jeans and the decade-old blazer she'd borrowed from her sister. This was supposed to be her day of shame, the public unraveling of a life that had already fallen apart in private. Her ex-husband's attorney had made sure of that, filing motion after motion, dragging her through legal mud until she could barely afford the gas to get here. But she'd come anyway, because sometimes showing up is the only form of dignity left. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Sarah took her seat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed a crease in her borrowed blazer. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with his new attorney, a sharp-dressed man with silver cufflinks and a smile that never reached his eyes. Marcus looked confident, almost bored. Scrolling through his phone like this was just another Tuesday inconvenience. He'd always been good at that, making her feel small without saying a word. For 3 years after their divorce, he'd withheld child support, citing technicalities and filing endless paperwork that she couldn't afford to fight. Their daughter Emma needed braces. She needed new shoes. She needed a father who cared more about her than winning. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise, the Honorable Judge Catherine Reynolds presiding. Everyone stood as the judge entered. A woman in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. She settled into her chair with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from seeing humanity at its worst and still choosing to believe in its best. Sarah's throat tightened. She'd read about Judge Reynolds online, strict but fair, they said. A former family court attorney who'd fought for single mothers before taking the bench, but Hope felt dangerous now. Hope had betrayed Sarah too many times. "Please be seated," Judge Reynolds said, her voice clear and measured. The proceedings began with the mechanical precision of legal theater, case numbers, filing dates, previous continuances. Marcus's attorney stood first, his voice smooth as polished marble. He painted a picture of a man who'd been cooperative, reasonable, who'd made every effort to meet his obligations despite his ex-wife's unreasonable demands. Sarah felt her stomach twist. It was a masterclass in rewriting history. She'd heard these lies before, but hearing them spoken aloud in a courtroom, with that tone of authority, made them feel almost true. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named David Chen who juggled 40 cases at once, did his best. He presented bank statements showing Marcus's substantial income. He showed Emma's medical bills, unpaid. He read text messages where Marcus promised support and then vanished. But Marcus's attorney had responses for everything, delivered with that infuriating calm. Sarah watched Judge Reynolds's face for any sign of which way this would go. Nothing. The judge's expression remained neutral, her pen moving across her notepad in steady, deliberate strokes. Then something shifted. Judge Reynolds looked up, not at the attorneys, but directly at Marcus. The courtroom fell silent in a way that felt different, heavier, more intentional. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of iron, "I have one question for you." Marcus straightened, glancing at his attorney, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. The judge leaned forward slightly. "When was the last time you looked your daughter in the eye?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus blinked, his confident expression flickering. I'm sorry, Your Honor." "It's a simple question," Judge Reynolds continued, her tone unchanged. "Not when did you last see her. Not when you last sent a text or fulfilled a visitation schedule. When did you last look Emma in the eye, really look at her, and see who she is?" The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt her breath catch. She hadn't expected this. No one had. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. His attorney started to stand, but Judge Reynolds raised a hand without looking at him. "I'm asking your client, counselor." Marcus cleared his throat. We've had scheduled visits, Your Honor. I see her according to." "That's not what I asked." The judge's voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. "I've been doing this for 23 years, Mr. Mitchell. I've seen every excuse, every justification. I've watched parents weaponize their children, turn love into leverage, reduce their own flesh and blood to line items on a legal document. She paused, letting the words settle. So I'm going to ask you again, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When did you last look at your daughter and see her, not as a financial obligation, not as a connection to your ex-wife, but as a human being who exists independently of your anger? The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the table. She could see Marcus's jaw working, could see the calculation behind his eyes as he tried to find the right answer, the one that would satisfy the judge, win the case, let him walk away still feeling righteous. But there was no right answer. Judge Reynolds had stripped away all the legal posturing and exposed the simple, terrible truth he didn't know. He couldn't answer because he hadn't been paying attention. Not to Emma, maybe not ever. I thought so, Judge Reynolds said softly when the silence stretched too long. She looked down at her notes, then back up at the courtroom. Here's what's going to happen. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Mitchell, you will pay the full amount of back child support, $47,000, within 90 days. Additionally, you will continue regular support payments as originally mandated, with an adjustment for cost of living increases that should have been applied 3 years ago. There will be no further delays, no further motions to reduce, no creative accounting. Marcus's attorney started to object, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, you will attend family counseling with your daughter, not for your benefit, Mr. Mitchell, but for hers. Because regardless of what's transpired between you and your ex-wife, Emma deserves a father who sees her. And if you can't figure out how to do that, then at the very least, you'll meet your financial obligations without turning it into a 3-year legal battle that's cost this young woman stability she can never get back. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through Sarah's chest like a bell. Court is adjourned. Sarah sat frozen as people began to move around her. David Chen was saying something congratulatory, gathering papers, but his voice sounded far away. Across the aisle, Marcus stood abruptly, his face red, his attorney speaking in urgent, hushed tones. But Sarah barely noticed. She was thinking about Emma who'd stopped asking when her brace's appointment would be, who'd learned to make her shoes last an extra season, who'd become so good at pretending everything was fine that Sarah sometimes forgot how much her daughter was carrying. Tonight, Sarah could call her daughter and say, "It's over. We won." As she stood to leave, Judge Reynolds caught her eye. The judge didn't smile, that would have been inappropriate, but there was something in her expression, a brief nod of acknowledgement. One woman who'd fought for her child, recognizing another woman who'd spent 2 decades fighting for others' children from the bench. Sarah walked out of that courtroom with her head higher than when she'd entered. The afternoon sun hit her face like a blessing, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the weight lift. Not completely, never completely, but enough to breathe. Because justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just one person asking the question no one else has the courage to ask. Sometimes it's a judge who remembers that behind every case number is a child waiting for someone to see them. Because dignity doesn't come